Last time we spoke about the advance in Ormoc Valley. As October of 1944 unfolded, in the Leyte campaign, American forces steadily pushed Japanese troops inland. Despite fierce resistance, they captured key positions like Dagami, Catman Hill, and multiple airstrips. While the Japanese reinforced areas like Ormoc, American regiments advanced through challenging conditions, relying on artillery amidst minimal air support due to weather and resource constraints. By the month's end, American forces had inflicted heavy casualties on the Japanese, securing vital beachheads and pushing closer to full control over Leyte. After suffering losses at Leyte Gulf, the 7th Fleet withdrew, leaving Kenny's P-38s to defend Tacloban's airfields amidst Japanese air raids. As kamikaze attacks grew, the USS Franklin sustained heavy casualties, while the Americans pressed forward, capturing Carigara, over on Leyte. Meanwhile, Australian forces began reclaiming New Britain, pushing Japanese forces back through guerrilla warfare. Facing tough jungle conditions, Australian and native troops gradually secured strategic positions by December, reinforcing the Allied grip in the Pacific. This episode is the Battle of Ormoc Bay. Welcome back to the Pacific War Podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister channel over at The Age of Conquest, The Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube and all major podcast platforms. Over on both of those, I'm finishing up my series covering the North Africa campaign during World War II. And I have a huge favor to ask you. I just opened up a YouTube membership. It's identical to my Patreon account, found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Joining either gets you access to the exclusive podcast with more than 25 plus episodes and ongoing. You also get early access to all of my content and voting rights for what we'll tackle next. This month's exclusive podcast is covering China's century of humiliation and how it molded the People's Republic of China we see today. So it's a bit of history and geopolitics. Now, if you decide you want to join the YouTube membership, you actually get a bit of a bonus. I have a lot of unlisted content that hasn't seen the light of day. Some of it's very politically incorrect, and quite funny to be honest, so I'd love for you guys to go check it out. As we've seen over the past few weeks, the Battle of Leyte Gulf saw General MacArthur's forces land and successfully defeat the 16th Division on Leyte Island, as well as seize Carigara and Pinapoan over on the northern coast. The 24th Division also engaged the enemy's reinforcements, centered around the elite 1st Division during the battle for the northern entrance into the Ormoc Valley. Meanwhile, Admiral Owachi and General Yamashita aimed to bring more reinforcements to Leyte, which would lead to another air-naval battle. In the previous week, we left off with Colonel Verbeck's 21st Regiment being engaged in a mission to capture Breakneck Ridge, fiercely defended by Colonel Miyachi's 57th Regiment. Simultaneously, General Kataoka mobilized his remaining 2 regiments to initiate a broad 4-pronged assault on the Pinapoan perimeter. However, the rugged terrain slowed their movement towards assembly areas. On the morning of November the 8th, a typhoon, moving in from the west, swept over the entire island of Leyte. Jan Malton, a member of the 24th Division, graphically described it as such. From the angry intensity of the heavens, floods raced in, almost horizontal, in sheets. Palms bent low under the storm, their fronds flattened like streamers of wet silk. Trees crashed to the earth. In the expanse of the Coglan grass, the howling of the wind was like a 1,000-fold plaint of the unburied dead. The trickle of supplies was at a standstill. On Carigara Bay, the obscured headlands mowed under the onslaught of the seas. Planes were grounded and ships became haunted things looking for refuge. Massed artillery, barrages to the summit of Breakneck Ridge sounded dim and hollow in the tempest. Trails were obliterated by the rain. The sky was black. And within the midst of this storm, the 21st Infantry attacked. As the typhoon swept across the island, Verbeck's forces launched a three-pronged assault on Breakneck Ridge and Hill 1525, facing staunch resistance from Yachi's defenders, but making considerable progress towards Hill 1525. Notably, plans for General Suzuki's offensive were found on a deceased Japanese officer, enabling General Kruger to redeploy his forces more effectively. On November the 10th, General Mudge sent elements of the 1st Cavalry Division to patrol the area of the mountains of central Leyte more intensively. From November the 5th through December the 2nd, elements of the 1st Cavalry Division extensively patrolled the central mountain area and had many encounters with small forces of the enemy. At all times, the supply situation was precarious. The 12th Cavalry established high in the foothills at the entrance to the passes through the mountains, a supply base that was also a native camp, a hospital, and a rest camp. About 300 Filipino carriers were kept here under the protection of the guerrillas. The carriers had been hired for 6 days at a time and were not allowed to leave without a pass from their Filipino leader. The precaution was necessary since the ration-carrying assignment was extremely arduous. The cavalrymen would frequently skirmish with the 41st Regiment and the 169th and 171st Independent Battalions during this period. Brigadier General Julian Cunningham's 112th Cavalry Regiment, expected by November the 14th, was tasked with relieving General Mudge's 1st Cavalry Division in the Caragara-Barugo area to enable a southwest advance from the Central Mountains and ease pressure on General Irving's 24th Division. General Bradley's 96th Division was directed to capture some high ground between Jaro and Tagame, with the 382nd Regiment remaining at Tagame to inflict significant losses on the 16th Division while securing Bloody Ridge. By November the 4th, the 382nd Regiment had made some progress into Bloody Ridge. The night of the 4th was not so quiet. The Japanese delivered harassing fire on the 1st Battalion, and at about 10:05, elements of the 16th Division launched a heavy assault against the perimeter of the 2nd Battalion. An artillery concentration immediately stopped the attack, and the Japanese fled, leaving 254 dead and wounded behind them. The following morning, after the artillery had fired a preparation in front of the 1st and 2nd Battalions, the two battalions renewed their attack at about 9 o'clock, and 2 companies from the 3rd Battalion protected the regimental left and the southern flank. The battalions advanced about 1,000 yards before they encountered any strong resistance. The defenses of the 16th Division consisted of a great many concrete emplacements, concealed spider holes, and connecting trenches. By nightfall, at about 5 o'clock p.m., the 2 battalions assisted by tanks from Company A of the 363rd Tank Battalion successfully reduced the enemy to their front and captured the ridge. Each battalion formed its own perimeter and made plans to renew their attack on the 6th. At 8:30 a.m., the 1st Battalion with light tanks and support moved out to attack westwards against a strong enemy force that was well entrenched in foxholes and pillboxes. Each of these defensive positions had to be reduced before the advance could continue. At 1 p.m., the 2nd Battalion moved to some high ground on the right flank of the 1st. The 1st Battalion encountered a strong concrete enemy pillbox, which was believed to be the command post, since there were no firing apparatuses. As grenades had no effect, it became necessary to finally neutralize the pillbox by pouring gasoline down the ventilation pipes and setting it afire. 2 officers and 19 enlisted men of the enemy were killed inside the pillbox. The Japanese continued to fight tenaciously, however. There was no withdrawal. By the end of the day, only isolated pockets of the enemy resistance remained. The Japanese 16th Division was taking a very bad beating. Its supply of provisions had all but run out. All the battalion commanders, most of the company commanders, and half of the artillery battalion and battery commanders had been killed. On the night of the 6th, the 16th Division contracted its battle lines and, on the following day, took up new positions at the Tagame area. The new position ranged from a hill about 4.5 miles northwest of Tagame to a point about 3 to 3/4 miles northwest of Baren. On the 7th, all 3 battalions of the 382nd Infantry engaged the enemy and maintained constant pressure against their positions. The 1st and 3rd Battalions advanced west, while the 2nd Battalion drove north and west. The 3rd Battalion encountered the most determined resistance. Advanced, preceded by tanks, it met heavy enemy machine gun and rifle fire. A large enemy force assaulted the troops at close quarters and tried to destroy their tanks, but when the 382nd Infantry introduced flamethrowers and supporting machine guns, the attackers fell back in disorder. The regiment overran the Japanese defensive positions and killed an estimated 474 of the enemy. Company E of the 2nd Battalion had remained in the Patok area, engaged in patrolling and wiping out isolated pockets of enemy resistance. On the 8th, strong patrols from the 1st and 2nd Battalions probed west into the hills. They encountered the left flank of the enemy's supporting position at a point about 2,600 yards west of Patak. A very heavy rainfall on the night of the 8th made the assault against the position impossible until the 9th. After all-night artillery fire, the 1st and 3rd Battalions moved out at 9 a.m. on the 10th. They met no resistance, but progress was slow because of the swamps. By 12:25, the 2 battalions, supported by a platoon of light tanks, occupied the ridge formerly held by elements of the 16th Division. The 1st Battalion had advanced 2,500 yards. The 382nd Infantry had destroyed all organized enemy resistance in its sector and removed the threat to Dagame. Meanwhile, General Arnold's 7th Division, stationed at the Barouan-Abiog area, began sending patrols from Bay towards Ormoc to prepare for a larger advance, while the 2nd Battalion, 32nd Regiment, moved to Bay, successfully ambushing the Japanese unit advancing to Abiog. Concurrently, Obawachi sent his 4th convoy from Manila, consisting of 3 transports, 4 frigates, and 6 destroyers under Admiral Kimura. This convoy carried the bulk of General Yamashita's 26th Division and approximately 3,500 tons of supplies, followed by another echelon of 3 transports with the remainder of the 1st Division. The echelon reached Ormoc the next day, unloaded successfully, and departed without any issue. However, the main convoy encountered air attacks as it approached Ormoc Bay, beginning its debarkation by nightfall. On the 10th, the 38th Bomb Group, based out of Morotai, sent 32 B-25 Mitchells, escorted by 37 P-47 Thunderbolts, to attack TA-4 near Ponson Island. Reaching the convoy just before noon, the B-25s attacked at a minimum altitude in pairs, sinking the 2 largest transports, the Takatsumaru and Kaishimaru, disabling a 3rd and sinking 2 of the patrol craft escorts at a cost of just 7 bombers, from which the group was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation. Although Yamagata's troops were finally ashore by November the 10th, most of the supplies couldn't be unloaded due to ongoing enemy air attacks. Shortly after leaving Ormoc, American planes intercepted the convoy, destroying 2 transports and 1 frigate, while further damaging another frigate and destroyer. Meanwhile, Okawachi dispatched a 3rd convoy consisting of 5 transports, a submarine chaser, and 5 destroyers under Rear Admiral Hayakawa Mikio, transporting special troops and heavy equipment of the 26th Division. When 1 transport ran aground on Luzon's Bondoc Peninsula, Kimura sent 2 frigates and 3 destroyers to transfer its cargo to Ormoc. As a result, Hayakawa's convoy arrived at Ormoc Bay on the 11th and began unloading. However, Ultra intercepts had detected the enemy convoy departing Manila, prompting Admiral Halsey to redeploy Task Force 38 under Admiral McCain. While under repair at Manila back on October the 29th, Nachi and Kumano were both attacked by Task Force 38. Nachi was hit by a single bomb to her aircraft deck, and this, as well as strafing attacks, killed 53 of her crew and further delayed her repairs. On November the 5th, again at Manila Bay, Nachi was attacked by 3 waves of American planes from the aircraft carriers USS Lexington and Ticonderoga. She escaped the first wave undamaged, but was hit by 5 bombs and 2 or 3 torpedoes in the second wave, while attempting to get underway. During the third wave, Nachi was hit by 5 torpedoes in her port side, which severed her bow and stern, with an additional 20 bombs and 16 rockets hitting her as well. Nachi's flight commander, Vice Admiral Kyohide Shima, was offshore for a conference at the time of the attack, but arrived at dockside in time to see his flagship literally blown apart. The central portion of the vessel sank in 102 feet of water about 12 nautical miles northeast of Corregidor. Now back at the action at hand, McCain launched an attack on Kimura's convoy. Just as unloading began, 347 planes struck, sinking all 4 transports and 4 destroyers, including the flagship Shimakaze, on which Hayakawa lost his life. This costly reinforcement operation thus ended in partial failure, with most equipment lost and over 1,500 casualties incurred. Nevertheless, elements of the 1st Division moved immediately towards the Leemon area, while Yamagata's units, though short on weaponry, were ordered to assemble at Dolores to prepare for joining the Imahori detachment at Daro. At the same time, noticing the rapid advance of the enemy into the Karigara area, Yamashita concluded that Suzuki's proposed offensive towards Tacloban was destined for failure. He ordered the main force of the 35th Army to join up with the 16th Division in the advantageous mountain positions of the Buruan-Dagami area to regain control of the recently captured airstrips, thereby limiting operations in the Karigara area by a holding action. Concurrently, as this adjustment to the tactical plan was made, Yamashita communicated his growing belief that the overall situation offered little hope for victory on Leyte and unsuccessfully tried to persuade General Torriachi to shift the decisive battle over to Luzon. As a result of Torriachi's decision, the 68th Brigade was still to be sent to Leyte. The 23rd Division was scheduled to go to Manila in mid-November before returning to Leyte, and the 10th and 19th Divisions were planned for a movement to the island by the end of the year. With the plans finalized for continuing the decisive battle in Leyte, Torriachi's headquarters departed Manila for Saigon on November the 17th. Back on Leyte on November the 9th, the wary mud-stained troops of the 21st Regiment launched another attack, with the 3rd Battalion assaulting the center of Breakneck Ridge and the 2nd Battalion targeting O.P. Hill, though they made only minor gains. Additionally, Verbeck's 1st Battalion attacked Leemon but was repelled by heavy enemy fire, and fresh Japanese troops subsequently counterattacked Hill 1525, forcing the Americans to retreat. Finally, Colonel Chapman's 2nd Battalion reached the western slopes of Hill 1525 in the afternoon, but it was too late for them to take part in the battle. On November the 10th, Verbeck continued his assault, successfully capturing O.P. Hill, and made significant headway in the area. At the same time, Chapman's 2nd Battalion began advancing westwards to establish a roadblock on Highway 2, approximately 2,000 yards south of Leemon. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Clifford's 1st Battalion of the 34th Regiment landed on the western shore of Carigara Bay and initiated a wide envelopment around the western flank of the 57th Regiment to secure the high ground known as Calais Ridge. Additionally, Mudge's cavalrymen pressed forward towards Mount Minoru. On this day, Yamashita's adjustments to the tactical plan finally reached Suzuki's headquarters. As a result, Suzuki abandoned his initial strategy and directed Yamagata to move his troops quickly to Albuera to prepare for an offensive eastward, dubbed Operation Wa. To replace the 26th Division in the upcoming operations on the Jaro front, Suzuki decided to deploy the 30th Division, which had not yet departed Mindanao, instructing them to land at Ipil to prepare to support the Imahuri detachment already skirmishing with Bradley's patrols. On November the 11th, following a heavy artillery barrage, Verbeck resumed his assault, although the 2nd Battalion quickly found itself pinned down, while the 1st Battalion successfully secured a ridge 300 yards southwest of O.P. Hill. The next morning, the 1st and 3rd Battalions advanced against the crest of Breakneck Ridge, successfully capturing the objective before being halted by Japanese artillery fire. At the same time, Chapman's 2nd Battalion reached Highway No. 2, and Clifford's 1st Battalion, supported by elements of the guerrilla 96th Regiment, arrived in the Cabiranan area. By November the 13th, Verbeck's 1st and 2nd Battalions advanced 600 and 400 yards respectively without encountering any opposition. Breakneck Ridge was secured, although the Japanese maintained control over several nearby spurs, particularly Corkscrew Ridge. Nonetheless, the 21st Regiment reported approximately 1,779 Japanese soldiers killed, suffering 630 casualties in the process. Additionally, Clifford's 1st Battalion successfully reached Calais Ridge undetected and quickly established defensive positions. At 8:55 on the 13th, a column of Filipino men, women, and children entered the perimeter and brought approximately 35 boxes of rations from Consugra. The battalion left the area at 9:30 and reached the ridge without any opposition. Trenches and prepared gun positions without a man in them honeycombed the ridge from one end to the other. It was evident the elements of the 1st Division had intended to occupy the area in the later stages of the battle for Leemon. On the 14th, Colonel Clifford ordered his battalion to entrench itself on the ridge in those positions that would afford the best tactical advantage. The battalion established strong points and observation posts on the knolls, placed blocks on the trails leading throughout the area, and sent out reconnaissance patrols to locate the enemy positions. Colonel Clifford made arrangements to utilize Filipinos as carriers. These men were to use a trail on the north end of the ridge to bring supplies to the battalion from the supply dump over at Casigra. The first human pack train arrived in the area at about 10:10 a.m. with 28 cases of rations and supply of batteries for the radios. At 11:25, enemy artillery shelled the southern end of the ridge, and 25 minutes later shifted its fire over to the Leemon area. The battalion did not succeed in establishing physical contact with the 2nd Battalion, 19th Infantry, which was operating east of the road, but it was able to make radio contact. Throughout the day, patrols of the battalion were active in searching out enemy positions. Meanwhile, the 112th Cavalry was landed at Carigara and was attached to the 1st Cavalry Division to strengthen the assault against the central Leyte Mountains. Meanwhile, the reserve 32nd Division, led by Major General William Gill, was also dispatched to the island to relieve the fatigued 24th Division. This newly arrived division was assigned the mission of capturing Leemon and advancing down the Ormoc Valley towards Ormoc itself. On the Japanese side, after receiving the rest of his division, Kataoka chose to move the 1st Regiment to the left flank to assist the 57th, which also was bolstered by 2 fresh battalions. This combined force aimed to launch an attack along the main road towards Pinamapoan, while the 49th Regiment and 171st Independent Battalion sought to envelop the enemy's left flank towards Colacian. By mid-November, the headquarters of the 102nd Division and most of the 664th Independent Battalion had also arrived in Ormoc, with Lieutenant General Fukai Shinpai taking command of the 41st Regiment and his other battalions on the island as they advanced towards Mount Pina. Furthermore, despite significant losses to enemy aircraft, 5 air regiments had reinforced the 4th Air Army, enabling General Tominaga to make the 4th Air Division fully operational, a unit that had previously focused solely on base activities and anti-submarine patrols. The replenishment of naval air strength was progressing quite well, with replacement aircraft for the 1st Combined Base Air Force outnumbering losses by 26% in November. On November the 15th, the combined fleet opted to cease training carrier air groups and instead focus on expanding the base air forces. The 3rd Air Fleet stationed in the homeland was tasked with training replacement units for the deployment to the Philippines. Due to the successful reinforcement of Japanese air forces in the Philippines and General Kenny's ongoing inability to provide close air support, Admiral Halsey once again directed Task Force 38 to attack enemy air bases on Luzon. On November the 13th and 14th, McCain's carriers conducted several strikes against Japanese airfields in Luzon, resulting in significant decrease in enemy air operations over Leyte. On the 13th, with the threat of American carrier strikes in Luzon, Kizo was ordered to return to Brunei, that evening carrying Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima. Yet before she could leave for Brunei, she was attacked while underway in Manila Bay by more than 350 carrier planes from Task Force 38. These were aircraft from the Hornet, Monterey, Cowpens, Essex, Ticonderoga, Langley, Enterprise, and San Jacinto. That's a lot of carriers. 3 bomb hits the Kizo to her starboard side, 1 in the bow, 1 near her boiler room, and 1 near her aft gun mounts. Kizo sank in shallow water just 13 kilometers west of Cavite. Captain Rinozuke Imamura and 103 of her crew survived, but 175 crewmen went down with the ship. Akibono, while alongside destroyer Akishimo at Cavite Pier near Manila, was attacked by the raid as well. A direct bomb hit set both ships ablaze, and the following day a large explosion on Akishimo blew a hole in Akibono, which sank upright in the shallow water, with 48 crewmen killed and 43 wounded. After returning to Manila, Hatsuharu was caught in the air raid in Manila Bay as well. A series of near misses buckled plates and set fires, causing the ship to sink in shallow water. The attack killed 12 crewmen and injured 16 more, but 218 survived. Several other vessels were also sunk. Meanwhile, November the 14th, the Hi-81 convoy, comprised of the escort carriers Shinyo and Akitsumaru, destroyer Akashi, seaplane tender Kyokawamaru, submarine chaser number 156, 7 escort ships, 5 oilers, and 3 transports left Imari Bay under Rear Admiral Seito Tsutsitomo. This convoy carried most of Lieutenant General Nishiyama Fukitaro's 23rd Division, heading into the Yellow Sea, wary of enemy submarines. After stopping for the night in Ikishima Channel near the Goto Islands, Seito's convoy resumed its journey on November the 15th, but was soon ambushed by 2 submarine wolf packs. Commander Charles Longman's submarines were the first to strike, successfully hitting the Akitsumaru with 2 torpedoes, which later sank, resulting in the loss of 2,046 lives, including most of the 64th Regiment. After the attack, Seito withdrew to Strange Island, located off the coast of Korea, to take refuge for the day. On the morning of November the 17th, the convoy resumed its journey, but was soon detected by a B-29 Superfortress as it was making its way towards the Shushan Islands. By late afternoon, Commander Gordon Underwood's submarines launched an assault on the Japanese ships, successfully striking the transport vessel Mayu Sanmaru, which sank quickly, resulting in the loss of 3,437 men, including most of the 72nd Regiment. Almost 12 hours later, 200 kilometers off Saishu Island, Spade Ship surfaced and attacked the Shinyo with 6 torpedoes. 4 struck the carrier on the starboard side at 11:03 p.m., to which it caught fire. At least 1,130 Japanese sailors went down with the ship. Only about 70 would survive, including Ishii. Kaishi immediately drew up several depth charges where the spaceship was thought to be. An oil slick and other debris eventually made the Japanese believe that they had sunk Spadefish, so the Kaishi broke off the engagement. But Spadefish had escaped apparently without serious damage. Only minor cracks were reported to have appeared on the submarine after the alleged sinking by Kaishi. Underwood's final strike was against the submarine chaser number 156, which sustained 3 torpedo hits and sank rapidly. Following some rescue efforts, Sato continued his advance on November the 21st, eventually arriving in Kaohsiung 5 days later. Half of the convoy then proceeded to San Fernando, where the remaining members of the 23rd Division disembarked on December the 2nd. But that's it for today with the Philippines, as we now need to shift over to Morotai. With Japanese reinforcements pushed back into the interior of the secured island, General Pearson's directed the 31st Division to capture several islands off New Guinea that served as observation points for Japanese outposts monitoring Allied movements. On November the 15th, the 2nd Battalion of the 167th Regiment landed on Pagun Island, followed by a successive attack on Brass Island the next day. By the 18th, with the Mapia Island secured, Company F of the 124th Regiment was sent to occupy the unguarded Asia Islands on November the 19th. In the Leyte region, Major General Jack Stevens' 6th Australian Division was assigned to relieve American forces, similar to the Australian efforts on New Britain and Bougainville, in order to free up troops for the Philippines campaign. By late October, a base had been successfully set up, allowing for the 19th Brigade to arrive by mid-November, with the 17th Brigade scheduled for early December and the 16th by the year-end. Under General Blamey's orders, the new Australian garrisons were to adopt a more active approach than their American counterparts, so Stevens planned not only to secure the airfield and radar installations in the Aitape-Taji area, but also to carry out extensive patrols in support of intelligence and guerrilla operations aimed at weakening the enemy in Wewak. One of General Stevens' tasks was to give maximum help to the AIB and Angao units in their area for their tasks of gaining intelligence, establishing patrol bases, and protecting the native population. These AIB and the Angao units have been active in the Sepik-Aitape Triangle area since the time of the landing of American forces in Aitape in April of 1944, and the 6th Division came into the area where, from the offset, practically all the deep patrolling had been done so by groups of Australians. In the Aitape area, prior to the arrival of the division, Angao long-range patrols operated without troop support, and for their own protection, inaugurated a type of guerrilla warfare. Selected village natives called sentries were taught to use grenades and Japanese rifles. The sentries, besides furnishing intelligence, accounted for a large number of the enemy. This system was continued. As each area was freed, the sentries would be rewarded and returned to their villages. By early November, the 210th Commando Squadron had established a patrol base at Babang, conducting numerous patrols throughout the month. Intelligence gathered suggested that Japanese forces were weakened, poorly nourished, and mainly focused on finding food. In response, Stevens planned 2 significant December operations: to sever the enemy's communication line along the Malin, Wallan, Wamissis, Amman axis, and to neutralize enemy positions east of the Danmap River. By November the 25th, the seasoned 2 and 7th Commando Squadron had arrived at Babang, and by the end of the month, the 19th Brigade took over the area. The commandos then advanced southwards, setting up a base at Tong on December the 4th, and established an outpost at Kumbum 3 days later. Now, to finish off this week's episode, let's explore the B-29 Superfortress operation going on during this period. After the Formosa air battle and the Omura raid of October the 25th, General LeMay's 20th Bomber Command conducted 4 missions in November. 3 of these supported Southeast Asia operations as part of PAC Aid, while the 4th targeted the Omura aircraft factory, a key focus for the command. On November the 3rd, 44 B-29s from India effectively bombed the Magalon Railway yards at Rangoon. 2 days later, 53 bombers hit Singapore's King George VI graving dock, the largest of several dry docks at Singapore and one of the world's best. The first of the 53 bombers attacking was over the target at 6:44 a.m., and the bombardier Lieutenant Frank McKenney put a 1,000-pound bomb into the target within 50 feet of the aiming point, that being the caisson gate. Lieutenant Bolish McIntyre, 2 planes back, laid another alongside. This was the sort of pickle-barreled bombing the Air Corps had talked about before the war. Strike photos showed a rush of water into the dock, presumptive evidence that the gate had been strained, and subsequent reconnaissance photos indicated that the dock was out of use. There was, of course, other hits on the dock. One hit a 465-foot freighter, alongside adjacent ships. For baksheesh, as the boys had learned to say in India, 7 B-29s bombed the secondary target, Pangkalabrang refinery in Sumatra, and reported direct hits on the cracking plant. The Japanese, evidently relying on the inaccessibility of Singapore, put up a feeble defense, but the long trip took a toll on the 2 planes and 12 crewmen, including Colonel Ted L. Faulkner, commander of the 468th Group. On November the 11th, 96 B-29s launched from China to strike Omuda under very difficult weather, saw only 29 reach the aircraft factory successfully, while 24 had to bomb Nanjing with limited results. The month's final mission on November the 27th saw 55 B-29s severely damage Bang Soa, marshalling yards in Bangkok. Meanwhile in the Marianas, General Hansel's 21st Bomber Command prepared for strikes on the Japanese home islands. In order to properly plan such missions, up-to-date reconnaissance photos of the proposed targets was needed. Other than information that was used during the Doolittle raid in 1942, there was scant information about the locations of Japanese industry, especially the aircraft industry. On November the 1st, 2 days after arriving on Saipan, a 3rd Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron, the F-13A Super Fortress, which was a photo reconnaissance configured B-29, took off bound for Tokyo. The aircraft flew over Tokyo at 32,000 feet for about 35 minutes, taking picture after picture. A few fighters made it up to the camera plane's altitude, but they did not attack. These photos, along with other intelligence, gave the 21st Bomber Command the locations of Japanese aircraft manufacturing plants and enabled mission planners to plan missions for the combat crews to attack. In honor of this mission, the aircraft was named Tokyo Rose. In response, about 10 G4Ms launched from Iwo Jima, and they attacked Islay Field on Saipan the very next day, scoring 5 bomb hits but losing 3 bombers. Hansel responded with a practice strike on Iwo Jima on November the 5th, though results were limited. On the 7th, the Japanese launched a follow-up attack, but it again resulted in minimal damage and cost them 3 more bombers. A retaliatory strike by 17 B-29s the next day also fell short. One squadron had to jettison its bombs into the ocean, while another dropped its load through a gap in the undercast. Between Japanese attacks, American aircrew inexperience, delays in constructing airfields in the Marianas, and the slow movement of B-29s to Saipan, the 21st Bomber Command was behind schedule in its planned offensive against the Japanese home islands. By the 15th, only half of the 73rd Bombardment Wing's authorized 180 B-29s had arrived, and by the 22nd, around 118 bombers were finally in place. At this point, General Arnold ordered Hansel to begin Operation San Antonio 1, marking the first strike against Tokyo. The chosen target was Nakajima's Musashi aircraft engine plant, which supplied 27% of Japan's combat aircraft engines. On the 24th, 111 B-29s took off for Japan, collectively carrying 277.5 tons of bombs. However, 17 bombers aborted mid-flight, and 6 others couldn't bomb due to mechanical issues. For the first time, the B-29s encountered the jet stream, which was a high-speed wind coming out of the west at speeds as high as 200 miles per hour, at precisely the altitudes at which the bombers were operating. This caused the bomber formations to be disrupted and made accurate bombing nearly impossible. As a result, only 24 B-29s actually bombed the Musashi plant, while 64 hit nearby dock and urban areas instead. The Japanese fighter response was less intense than expected, with the Americans claiming to have downed 7 fighters, likely destroying 18 more, and damaged 9, losing just 1 bomber in return. Another B-29 was lost on the return trip after running out of fuel and having to ditch. Despite disappointing bombing results in the mission, only 48 bombs struck the factory area, causing damage to just 1% of the building area and 2.4% of the machinery, with 57 killed and 75 injured. The raid exposed the weaknesses in Japan's air defense and showcased the 6 million residents of Tokyo that they were vulnerable to attack. Given the limited impact of the November 24th mission, Hansel decided to launch a second major strike dubbed San Antonio 2, targeting Musashi once more. However, in the early hours of November the 27th, 2 GM-4 bombers from Iwo Jima carried out low-altitude raids against Islay Field, escaping after destroying 1 B-29 and damaging 11 others. Later that day, 12 bomb-equipped Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters from the IJN's 252nd Kokutai, accompanied by 2 Nakajima C6N Martyr reconnaissance aircraft for navigation purposes, departed Iwo Jima for Saipan. The attackers flew just above sea level to avoid U.S. radar, and one of the Zeros was forced to divert to Bagan after its propeller struck a wave. This aircraft would be shot down by a thunderbolt while attempting to land. The remaining 11 Zeros arrived over Saipan at noon, shortly after the 21st Bomber Command's second raid on Tokyo had departed. These aircraft strafed Islay Field, destroying 3 or 4 B-29s and damaged up to 2 others. One of the Japanese pilots actually landed his fighter on Islay Field and then fired on the airfield personnel with his pistol until he was killed by a rifle. This incident was witnessed by Brigadier General Haywood Hansel, the commander of 21st Bomber Command. None of the other 10 Zeros survived, 4 were shot down by fighters and 6 by anti-aircraft guns. During all the chaos, US gunners also accidentally shot down a Thunderbolt, which was later assessed to be inexcusable. Of the 81 bombers launched, 19 aborted, and those that reached Tokyo found the target covered by clouds, forcing them to drop bombs by radar over Tokyo's docks, urban areas, and the cities of Hamamatsu, Shizuoka, Numazu, and Osaka. Ultimately, for the loss of one super fortress, the damage caused by the second strike was quite minimal. However, the strong Japanese response led Hansel to relocate some B-29s from Islay to safer Guam, strengthen Saipan's defenses and radar equipment, and planned coordinated air-sea operations to neutralize Iwo Jima's staging fields. I'd like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at The Age of Conquest, The Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War Channel, found over on YouTube and all major podcast platforms. Over on the YouTube channel, I'm about to release a full documentary based off of my interview with Lieutenant Colonel Tom Williams and his time serving during the Vietnam War. That same raw interview can be found on my podcast platforms. I'd also like to ask you a favor. I recently opened up a YouTube membership which is identical to my Patreon account, which can be found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. If you join either, you get access to the exclusive podcast, which is about 25 episodes and ongoing at this point, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. But if you decide to join the YouTube membership, there is a bit of a bonus. I have a lot of unlisted content there that hasn't seen the light of day. I will be honest, it's a lot of goofy ass shit, but it might be of interest to you, so check it out. The Americans pressed through Leyte's treacherous terrain and fierce resistance, aiming to secure strategic positions. Typhoons, enemy reinforcements, and brutal battles tested them harshly, but they advanced steadily. Despite heavy losses and airstrikes from both sides, American forces captured Breakneck Ridge and they were pushing onwards, inching closer to victory.